Thunder gnawed the battlements, as fire clawed the sky and stones screamed. Sir Rowan Vale said, "Do not go with him," while ash stung his tongue and his oath burned hotter. Lady Elara Myriel said, "If I refuse, your king dies, and so do you." And tears cut clean paths through soot. Lord Malric Drager closed a gauntlet on her wrist with ritual calm. Rowan tasted copper fear and pride curdling into rage. Elara said, "Listen to me, I choose you," and her whisper struck harder than the storm. A sigil flared red beneath the watchtower like a waking heart. Rowan said, "This is a trap," and his blade lifted though duty begged restraint. Calder Thorn watched from the arch, eyes bright with old grief. Magister Alden Grey shouted, warnings drowned by rune thunder. Malric said, "Love breaks more empires than steel," and pulled her toward the gate. The sigil detonated, unspooling light that peeled banners like bark. Rowan lunged, too slow, as shockwaves folded the night into glass. Elara reached back, palm open, a promise breaking in the blast. Rowan said, "I will find you," and the vow steadied his shaking soul. Smoke bled from the stones while healers shouted, and bells tolled a faltering rhythm. Rowan said, "Report," though his voice felt borrowed from a braver man. Tamsin Reed said, "You look like a bonfire chewed you and lost," and her grin shook. Alden tightened a bandage and hid a wince that was not about wounds. Rowan said, "Malric has her," and the words tasted like rust. Tamsin said, "Then we steal her back," and hope flickered in the wreckage. Alden said, "The sigil was royal bloodwork," and silence took the room. Rowan gripped the edge of the cot until nails hurt. He saw Elara's hand reaching, bright as a star in rain. Alden said, "If you chase now, you die, and the gate seals behind you." Rowan said, "If I stay, I rot," and the bandage felt like a shackle. Tamsin said, "We plan, we breathe, we lie if we must," and she set a blade by his side. The bells slowed as if the city chose a steadier heart. Night folded over the ruined glasshouse where moonlight painted broken panes like runes. Rowan said, "You risked everything for me," to a memory that answered in Elara's voice. The ivy muttered in the wind like gossiping ghosts. Elara said, "I chose you before the blast," and the echo settled in his ribs. He laid her pendant on a cracked sill, as if a shrine could bargain with fate. Tamsin kept watch, a shadow among darker shadows. Rowan said, "If duty is a chain, I will wear it long enough to break it," and the vow rang. A moth battered itself against moonlight, because that is what longing does. Alden said, "Love and law seldom share a roof," and his tone held tired kindness. Rowan said, "Then I will raise a tent between them," and the joke almost smiled. Far towers burned low like stubborn prayers. The night held its breath and did not help. Orders arrived on black wax and colder words. The council demanded patrols, oaths, and silence where truth should breathe. Rowan said, "They will brand love as treason," and the seal cracked under his thumb. Alden said, "They will brand anything that frightens them," and folded the decree. Tamsin said, "Then be boring in daylight and dangerous at dusk," and she hid a smile in her hood. Rowan said, "I will not name her," and the admission bit. A raven tapped the sill like a messenger that forgot its message. Alden said, "There are symbols in the blast you did not see," and chalk whispered across slate. Lines formed a knot that looked like fate pretending to be geometry. Rowan said, "Show me where to cut," and the chalk paused over a single loop. The room felt smaller than his promise. The mark appeared while he buckled his gauntlet, a thin red loop searing over his palm like a wedding band drawn in fire. Rowan said, "Elara," and the name cooled the sting. The loop pulsed to a heartbeat he knew too well. Alden said, "A binding, but not a chain," and worry blurred his certainty. Tamsin said, "If it answers, ask it something useful," and her humor softened the fear. Rowan said, "Where are you?" and the mark brightened and tugged north like a compass made of ache. Outside, the rain began again, as if the sky rehearsed sorrow. Alden said, "Each question costs you," and the room leaned closer. Rowan said, "I will pay." And the words landed like coin on stone. Somewhere far, a horn cried and cut off. The mark dimmed, the direction set, and the night opened like a road. Dawn pooled in the chapel like pale wine, and Rowan knelt where candle smoke remembered last night's storm. Sir Rowan Vale said, "I wear courage like borrowed mail," and his hands shook where the vow should live. Magister Alden Grey said, "Fear is a map when you refuse to fold it," and chalk traced a circle around Rowan's shadow. Tamsin Reed said, "Maps want roads, not graves," and she set a blade on the stone as if it were a promise. Rowan said, "The mark answers my voice but not my worth," and heat pulsed through his palm, counting distance in pain. Alden said, "A binding listens to the heart's grammar," and his smile did not quite reach his eyes. Rowan said, "I was taught duty first, then breath, and shame thinned the air." Tamsin said, "Breathe anyway, and I will lie for you until truth can walk," and the joke steadied him. Alden said, "Every question you ask her will cost a memory," and the chalk stopped on a name he did not write. Rowan said, "Take my cleverness, keep my courage," and the room held still. The bells began again, quiet as trust learning to stand. Wind worried the banners of Malric's black camp, as if the night itself were bargaining. Lady Elara Myriel said, "If you must parade victory, leave my heart out of it," and her smile was porcelain over thunder. Lord Malric Drager said, "Hearts travel with their owners," and the tent lamplight made iron of his words. Elara said, "Call it hostage or guest, I will not break," and the lie warmed her like armor. Calder Thorn stood near the flap, a shadow deciding its shape. Malric said, "Your kingdom taught Rowan to kneel to law, not love," and the jab found its mark in her silence. Elara said, "He kneels to what he chooses," and memory carried rain across her tongue. Calder said, "Riders at the North Ridge," and his eyes did not touch hers. Elara said, "Let me tend the wounded and earn your mercy," and the request hid a thread of time. Malric said, "Earn it fast," and the lamplight flickered as if it feared him. The drill yard steamed under a thin sun, and Rowan bruised his doubt against the day until the day bruised back. Sir Rowan Vale said again, and his blade traced the loop Alden drew in chalk. Tamsin Reed said, "You fight like a poem that forgot its last line," and she flashed in to tap his pauldron. Rowan said, "Then teach me the rhyme that wins her," and sweat salted his vow. Magister Alden Grey said, "Your pulse must pair with hers," and the staff rapped time like a stern metronome. Rowan said, "When I breathe on 2 beats, I feel her turn," and the mark brightened under leather. Tamsin said, "Hold that thread and cut everything else," and the world trimmed to a narrow door. Alden said, "Doorways demand prices," and he sketched a rune of opening that looked like a scar. Rowan said, "I will pay in fear first," and his next step landed clean. The sun climbed, unimpressed, and kept them honest. Moonrise poured milk over the battlements, and quiet finally heard itself think. Sir Rowan Vale said, "If you can hear me, turn toward the wind," and the mark shivered like a sparrow. Lady Elara Myriel said, "I turn, and the wind smells of rain," and her voice crossed his bones like a bridge. Rowan said, "They called love treason today," and the silence that answered was a held breath. Elara said, "Then we are traitors to despair," and laughter almost dared the night. Rowan said, "I was not born brave," and the admission unclasped another fear. Elara said, "Neither was I, but I am stubborn," and warmth gathered where absence usually lived. Rowan said, "I will come by the North Marsh," and the vow chose a road. Elara said, "The marsh keeps secrets better than kings," and the bond throbbed once, tender and fierce. The moon did not bless them, but it watched. Ink waited like a witness while arguments circled the war table and refused to land. Sir Rowan Vale said I should petition the king, and the words felt polite as a funeral. Tamsin Reed said, "Petitions are for people who want tomorrow," and she slid a map north with a ringed finger. Magister Alden Grey said, "If you vanish, I cannot shield you from the council," and the fear in his tone wore no robe. Rowan said, "Shield me from myself instead," and the request surprised him. Tamsin said, "We travel light, lie well, and return with a queen or a ghost," and the plan breathed. Alden said, "Take the old road that remembers mercy," and chalk marked a path through thorn symbols. Rowan said, "I will leave a letter the king can forgive," and humor finally blinked away. Tamsin said, "I will steal the seal he forgives with," and the room almost smiled. The candle guttered and straightened, and the night folded itself into packs. The marsh breathed fog as if the earth hid secrets in its lungs. Sir Rowan Vale said, "Every step feels like treason to the road," and water swallowed his boots. Tamsin Reed said, "Roads want soldiers, swamps want liars," and her smirk flickered under hooded eyes. The reeds hissed like gossip when the wind shifted. Rowan said, "Elara's pull beats here," and his palm burned bright beneath leather. Tamsin said, "Then we pray the swamp listens to hearts more than crowns," and she traced the map against her thigh. Fireflies sparked and died as if the marsh mocked hope. Rowan said, "I would burn for her," and the vow landed heavy as mud. The bog croaked its answer, cruel and endless. Tamsin said, "Save burning for kings," and laughter cracked the dark. Lantern light cut sharp slices through Malric's war tent, and the wounded moaned like a choir of defeat. Lady Elara Myriel said, "Your conquest reeks of rot," and her hands pressed cleaning cloth against broken skin. Lord Malric Drager said, "Mercy is a coin too dear," and his shadow split the canvas like iron. Elara said, "I will pay with my hands, not my silence," and the cloth soaked scarlet. Calderthorne said, "Some debts demand blood alone," and his gaze slid past her, unreadable. Elara said, "Then watch me break the rule," and her voice carved space where fear lived. Malric said, "Rowan will die chasing a ghost," and his laugh cracked like bone. Elara's jaw clenched, and she whispered, "Not while I breathe." The monastery ruins slouched against the marsh road, half swallowed by ivy and time. Sir Rowan Vale said, "It waits like a grave pretending to pray," and his grip tightened on hilt. A figure in monk's robes said, "Graves pray louder than kings," and the hood shadowed a shifting smile. Tamsin Reed said, "Name yourself before I name you, thief," and her blade tapped stone. The stranger said, "Nix Arlen, pilgrim of many faces," and his voice bent like water. Rowan said, "Faces hide knives," and the mark burned warning. Nix said, "Or truths you cannot bear," and his eyes flickered silver before returning brown. Tamsin said, "I like him less when he talks," and Rowan agreed with silence. Inside the command tent, silence weighed heavier than steel. Lord Malric Drager said, "Prophecy bends for no night," and his hand traced the sigil glowing on a black map. Lady Elara Myriel said, "Prophecy bends for those who refuse its leash," and her words carried fire through frost. Calderthorne said, "Bending breaks, men," and his voice trembled like an old scar. Malric said, "Rowan carries a mark meant for kings, not lovers," and the words sliced like cold iron. Elara said, "Then let him be both," and her defiance bared teeth. Malric smiled, cruel and quiet. The tent shuddered with wind that smelled of ash. The ford roared where black water beat against jagged stone, and mist cut sight to ribbons. Sir Rowan Vale said, "If she waits beyond, then so will I," and his boots found the first slick rock. Tamsin Reed said, "Wraiths guard crossings that matter," and her bowstring whispered tight. The water shimmered with pale forms, eyes hollow lanterns. Rowan said, "Her heartbeat pulls me through," and the mark flared crimson. Nix Arlen said, "Heartbeat or no, the river takes names before it gives passage," and his grin shifted like masks. Rowan said, "Then it will take mine last," and he stepped deeper as shadows closed in. The ruins of the northern keep stood like broken teeth against a restless sky, lightning crawling across its jagged crown. Sir Rowan Vale said, This place stinks of betrayal, and his mark pulsed like a wound. Nix Arlen said, walls remember every oath broken here, and his grin flickered beneath the hood. Tamsin Reed said, or maybe they just echo fools who love too loudly, and she traced her dagger across stone as if daring it to answer. Rowan said, Elara's cry brushed my mind here, and his jaw locked. Nix said, cries linger where lies are buried, and his voice slipped like smoke. The storm swallowed their silence until only the rain dared speak. Inside the keep's hall, fire still smoldered in pits where knights once swore fealty. Magister Alden Grey said, this was where my vows were carved, and his voice cracked like old wood. Rowan said, and where they burned, and ash stirred under his boots. Tamsin Reed said, you should have warned us, and the reproach bit sharper than her blade. Alden said, some truths poison faster than silence, and his hands trembled on staff. Rowan said, then we drink poison daily, and his vow tasted bitter. The hall moaned with wind that carried ghosts of banners long dead. Alden whispered the prophecy was seated here, and chalk fell from his hand like snow. Lord Malric Drager's shadow fell across Elara like a curse, as she was dragged before the broken throne. Malric said, queens are forged in fire, not chosen by love, and his grip bruised her arm. Lady Elara Myriel said, love is the fire you fear most, and her emerald eyes burned brighter than torches. Calderthorne said, this hole eats hope, and his voice trembled like chains. Malric said, then let it feast, and he smiled like sharpened steel. Elariah said, Rowan will come, and the defiance lit her face. Malric said, and die, and the hall darkened as if in agreement. The marsh road split under black oaks, and Rowan's mark flared wild with pain. Sir Rowan Vale said, she suffers, and his knees buckled as if the bond cut bone. Tamsin Reed said, then rise before the swamp drowns us both, and her hand caught his shoulder. Nix Arlen said, suffering is a chain prophecy loves to polish, and his smirk gleamed. Rowan said, I will break it, and his teeth clenched like iron. The trees whispered with 1,000 false voices, each one sounding like Elara. Alden said, not every voice is hers, and fear bent his age. Rowan shouted, then I will learn hers by heart, and the mark steadied. The keep's crypt exhaled frost, and secrets stirred in the dark where kings once rotted. Rowan said, if truth sleeps here, I will wake it, and torchlight painted his armor gold. Alden said, some truths kill their herald, and fear caught his throat. Tamsin Reed said, then let us die noisy, and her grin was defiance. Nix Arlen said, or die fooled, and his silver eyes gleamed under hood. The walls dripped with runes that shifted like serpents. Rowan pressed his palm against stone, and Elara's heartbeat pulsed through it. Rowan said, she calls me, and the crypt roared with echoes. The stone split, and a hidden stair gaped like a mouth. The crypt's stair plunged into breathless dark air damp with secrets unsaid. Sir Rowan Vale said, her heartbeat pulls harder here, and the mark throbbed red as coals. Magister Alden Grey said, blood calls to blood, and his voice cracked with dread. Tamsin Reed said, if we find bones instead, you owe me a drink, and her laugh was sharp against fear. Nix Arlen said, or perhaps we find chains, and his grin curled. Thone trembled, whispering Elara's name in every echo. Rowan said, I will not stop until walls answer me, and his vow rang hard. The stair uncoiled into a chamber where a coffin lay untouched, glowing faint with runes. Alden whispered, this is no tomb, it is a prison, and silence clawed at them. Elara's voice bled through the runes, faint as a dream. Lady Elara Myriel said, Rowan, and the word throbbed through stone. Rowan said, I hear you, and his hand pressed hard, mark burning. Malric's voice seeped into the chamber, cold as oil. She's bound to prophecy, not to you. Rowan said, prophecy bends, and rage scorched his chest. Tamsin Reed said, if he speaks here, he watches, and her eyes darted. Nyx Arlen said, prisons hold truths better than locks, and his smirk widened. Elara whispered, find me, or I am gone, and silence after carried her fear. Rowan said, I will rip every stone apart, and the runes cracked. The coffin shook, dust falling like sand from an hourglass. The coffin burst open with a scream of air, but it was not Elara inside. A figure rose, Calder Thorn, eyes hollow, armor cracked with rune-fire. Calder said, I was the shield, now I am the chain, and sorrow twisted his voice. Rowan said, they turned you, and his blade quivered. Calder said, I turned myself when hope rotted, and the fire in his chest pulsed. Elara's voice echoed faint, do not trust him. Tamsin Reed said, you look like a ghost that remembers bleeding, and her bowstring tightened. Calder said, I bleed for her still, and tears cut ash down his cheeks. Nyx whispered, tragedy wears the prettiest mask, and silence bowed to it. Rowan stood torn between brotherhood and love, blade shaking. Calder said, she cannot be freed unless I fall, and his voice pleaded. Rowan said, you ask me to kill what remains of us, and grief splintered his tone. Calder said, I ask you to kill what chains her, and rune-fire flared. Elara's voice cried, do not let him, and pain cracked the chamber. Tamsin Reed said, prophecy feasts on impossible choices, and her eyes brimmed. Nyx Arlen said, yes, let tragedy taste sweeter, and his grin sharpened. Rowan roared, I will not lose both. And the mark on his palm lit brighter than Calder's chest. The walls groaned like the world itself watching. The chamber erupted as Rowan struck the rune wall instead of Calder. Rowan said, I break chains, not brothers, and light tore through stone. Calder screamed as rune-fire leapt from him into the breach. Elara's cry pierced Rowan, and her voice surged nearer. Malric's laughter thundered above, shaking the keep. Alden shouted, the prophecy twists. But his words drowned in collapsing stone. Tamsin Reed grabbed Rowan's arm, saying, you've torn the road open, and dust rained on them. Nyx Arlen whispered, every door hides a dagger, and his silver eyes gleamed. Through the breach, Elara's figure flickered, bound in chains of light. Rowan said, hold fast. I am coming, and the vow cracked the air like thunder. The breach split the crypt wide, spewing light and ash as chains of radiance bound Elara to a throne of stone. Sir Rowan Vale said, I will break them, and his vow thundered. Lady Elara Myriel said, they feed on your blood, and her cry shook the chamber. Lord Malric Drager's voice poured through the fissure, sharp and cruel. Every cut you make writes my prophecy. Rowan said, then I will write it in love, and his blade flared. Calder Thorn staggered forward, clutching his burning chest, saying, strike me, free her, or both are lost. Tamsin Reed said, this choice kills either way, and her hands shook though her bow stayed drawn. Nyx Arlen whispered, every truth splits hearts in two, and silver eyes glowed with delight. Rowan roared, Elara, hold fast, and the mark on his palm blazed brighter than the chains. The chamber buckled as Calder roared, rune-fire spilling from his chest like molten chains. Calder said, if I fall, she lives, and tears seared his scarred cheeks. Rowan said, you were my brother, and grief cracked his armor more than blades. Elara cried, do not take him, and her voice rattled the chains. Malric's laugh boomed, love devours itself, and I dine on the crumbs. Tamsin Reed said, prophecy is a vulture. It waits for you to choose, and her bowstring trembled. Nyx Arlen said, every hero learns blood tastes of ash, and he watched, amused. Rowan said, I will not kill him, and his blade cut stone instead, sparks shattering across the floor. Calder screamed, falling, as rune-fire leapt into the chains binding Elara, weakening them with every convulsion. The throne cracked as Elara's chains snapped one by one, light bursting like stars. Elara said, Rowan, and her voice steadied his shaking hands. Rowan said, I have you, and he pressed his palm against the last shackle. Malric's voice thundered, touch her and kingdoms burn. Alden Grey burst into the chamber, robes torn, shouting, the prophecy is a lie. His words were sown in blood to bind us. Tamsin Reed said, then lies hold sharper teeth than truth, and she loosed an arrow into a rune. Sparks rained as the glyph cracked. Nyx Arlen said, lies or truth, both bleed sweet, and he laughed in the shadows. Rowan cried, I choose her over kingdoms, and the final chain exploded. The chamber collapsed in fury, as Malric tore through the breach, cloak aflame with runes. Malric roared, you unmade my prophecy, and his blade of shadow carved the air. Rowan met him saying, then face love unbound, and their clash rang like thunder. Elara said, I will not be silent, and she wove green fire from her hands, striking the walls. Alden cried, her power awakens, the bond makes her more than mortal, and fear and awe tangled in his eyes. Tamsin Reed said, then let prophecy choke on its own lies, and she cut through shadows with her dagger. Nyx Arlen whispered, chaos tastes ripe, and vanished into smoke. Rowan shouted, this ends with us, and sparks rained across steel as their duel consumed the chamber. Steel clashed with shadow, fire with fury, and the chamber screamed. Rowan said, this is for Elara, and his blade carved through darkness. Malric snarled, she belongs to fate, and runes blazed across his chest. Elara cried, I belong to myself, and green fire shot into the wound Rowan cut. Malric staggered, roaring as prophecy chains shattered in light. Alden Grey shouted, the cycle breaks, and tears lined his soot-streaked face. Tamsin Reed said, then let us write a new one, and her blade struck deep into a rune at Malric's back. Malric's scream shook the keep as shadow bled away, leaving silence heavy. Rowan caught Elara in his arms as dust fell like snow. Rowan whispered, you are free, and the vow bound them more tightly than chains ever could. The crypt lay in ruin, silence draped over shattered stone like a burial shroud. Sir Rowan Vale said, it is over. But his voice trembled with disbelief. Lady Elara Myriel, freed yet pale, whispered, no, it has only begun, and her emerald eyes glimmered with resolve. Magister Alden Grey said, the prophecy lies in ashes, but ash can seed again, and his weary frame sagged. Tamsin Reed said, then let us trample it before it sprouts, and her dagger clanged against rock. Nyx Arlen, stepping from shadow, said, seeds thrive in blood, and you've spilled enough to water fields. Rowan's grip tightened around Elara, saying, not one more drop will feed it. Calder Thorn, broken yet breathing, rasped, I am already the field, and fire flickered faintly in his chest. Elara said, then we heal it, and her hand pressed to Calder's brow. The chamber filled with light, softer than dawn. Outside, dawn climbed slow over the marsh, mist curling like ghosts unwilling to leave. Rowan said, the world feels too quiet, and his blade hung heavy at his side. Elara said, quiet is the sound of beginnings, though her hand trembled in his. Alden said, do not mistake silence for peace, and his eyes scanned the horizon. Tamsin Reed said, peace is earned with knives hidden in boots, and her smile was tired but sharp. Nyx Arlen chuckled, and here I thought romance would taste sweeter, before vanishing into fog. Rowan muttered, he will return, and his jaw set like stone. Calder Thorn, leaning on broken spear, whispered, if I walk among you it is mercy, not mine. Elara touched his arm, saying, it is mercy enough. The sun bled through the mist, painting them in fragile fire. The council's hall loomed, scarred by war yet demanding allegiance. Rowan said, they will brand me traitor, and his palm burned faintly under gauntlet. Elara said, then let us both be traitors, her voice fierce against marble silence. Alden said, kings listen to fear, not truth, and his sigh aged him further. Tamsin Reed said, then let's scare them clever, and her grin broke tension. Rowan stepped forward, declaring, I choose love over law, and his voice cut like steel. The council gasped, whispers swarming. Elara raised her hand, chains of light gone, saying, "And I choose freedom over fate." Nyx's voice echoed faintly, "Choices taste like poison and wine," though he was unseen. Calder, silent at Rowan's back, bled dignity instead of fire. The chamber tilted, history bending under their vow. The night returned with storms, as Rowan and Elara stood atop the battlements. Rowan said, "I swore to protect this kingdom, yet I nearly burned it," and rain soaked his hair. Elara said, "You swore to protect me, and you kept it," and her lips curved against grief. Tamsin Reed said, "Don't make the sky jealous with speeches," and her laugh bounced like lightning. Alden said, "Every vow broken tonight birthed another," and his eyes sought constellations lost to clouds. Calder said, "I was a shield and a chain, now I am only a scar," and his words hollowed the wind. Rowan took Elara's hand, saying, "Then let this scar remind us to choose," and warmth glowed faint against the storm. Elara whispered, "Then I choose you," and the words steadied the sky. The battlefield lay quiet, grass bending in twilight winds where war once screamed. Rowan whispered, "This silence feels earned," and his sword planted in earth like a gravestone. Elara knelt beside him, saying, "And love feels less forbidden," her emerald eyes soft as dusk. Tamsin Reed said, "For once, no prophecy, no counsel, just us," and her grin eased. Alden said, "Peace is fragile as glass," and his weathered hand traced sigils into soil, "Blessings for tomorrow." Calder said, "I will walk alone until my chains rust," and he turned toward shadowed roads. Rowan said, "You will always be brother," though the words cracked. Nyx's voice drifted on the wind, "Every ending is just a disguise," and then silence. Rowan and Elara kissed beneath a sky painted in fading fire. Their vow echoed wordless, eternal.